Our next reader tonight is a Latinx Californian and award-winning journalist who lives in her hometown with her young son and husband. Her creative work has been published or is forthcoming from Punk Noir Magazine, Maudlin House, The Right Launch, Void Space Zine, Daily Drunk Magazine, and Rejection Letters, among others. Her creative nonfiction, Six Gunfights, received a Best of the Net nomination from Variant Lit. She has also served as the co-guest editor of Roy Faineant Press's first special issue, Heat, back in June 26 of 2022, and is now a reader and editor for the mag, which is a fantastic mag. You guys should definitely check out in your spare time as well. You can follow her on Twitter at Melissa Cuisine or on Instagram at The Irish Months, and you can read more of her work at melissafloresandersonwrites.com. Please welcome Melissa Flores Anderson.
Sorry, trying to remember how to unmute myself here. I'm going to be reading a creative nonfiction piece that was published, I believe it was back in October, written about my son and my husband, and something that happened at our house. So I'll just jump in. One dead day. What should we do with the body? My husband asked this on the side of our house next to the pink tea tree bushes where the west side of the wall is all in shade at the end of the day, even though we hadn't yet found any sort of body to speak of. We save everything to do with death, anything ugly, anything unsavory, for after our 4-year-old is asleep. Anything R-rated, like the latest episodes of Mayor of Easttown, which also coincidentally happened to deal with homicide. But this probably wasn't a homicide. Maybe manslaughter, at worst, or negligence. The first sign of something wrong came when my mother dropped my 4-year-old son off. I answered the door to let her in, and she looked down at the pavement on our porch. Did someone get cut out here? She asked. I walked out onto the welcome mat without shoes and saw a few drips of red. Looks like blood, my mother said. I stepped back in and slipped my flip-flops on to get a closer look. A half moon of spattered blood stained the cement next to the hydrangea pot, and then dozens of drips pooled a few feet away, leading in a trail toward the lantana bush outside our front window. The drops disappeared into the tan bark, the brown colors too close to the dried red smears to distinguish. My son also inspected, bending his lanky frame in half so his face was inches from the cement. He touched a spot and sniffed his hand. Don't do that, baby, that's gross, I told him and pulled his still chubby hand into mine, dragging him into the house, while I called my husband away from his YouTube viewing of garden videos to inspect. I don't know what it is, I said. It wasn't here this morning. Maybe it was a lizard, my husband said. The smallest creature around he could think of to minimize the situation. That much blood for a lizard? Maybe a squirrel? The park across from us was 57 acres of open space with grasslands, wooded areas, and a creek full of wildlife. We saw bird species, lizards sunning on piles of mulch, jackrabbits bounding across overgrown wildflower fields, and hundreds of ground squirrels who created a patchwork of burrows we avoided on our walks. A few weeks before, a herd of baby squirrels took shelter in the drain pipe near our curb. They darted out like pinballs in a machine, unexpected and without rhythm, one after the other. My husband and I had joked that it was a matter of time before we hit one. Still seems like a lot of blood for a baby squirrel, I added. Maybe not if it lost a leg, my husband said, and peeked under the car he had driven to the store earlier that morning. But there was no sign of blood near the car. It started on our porch. I'll help you find it, Daddy, my son said. We can glue the leg back on. Let's deal with this later, I told my husband, not wanting to get my son started on dead things again. My son had been obsessed with death a few months earlier when his grandparents' dog collapsed on a walk to the park. At the start of the pandemic, my mother had gotten in the habit of bringing the dog over 3 times a week to walk with us. Cassidy was a 30-pound mutt, part Shiba Inu, part Staffordshire Terrier, and part Cajun. By the time my son came along, the dog had mellowed in her old age. She had grown accustomed to his grabby hands, and her failing hearing kept her calm around his shrieks. On the days my mother came over, my son held the leash for a block or so, and he would call her his best dog. When we planned his 4th birthday, the dog was the first added to the guest list. We knew the dog was getting older. She had a growth in her abdomen, non-cancerous, but something the vet had been watching for a couple years. She still loved her walks and dinner time and begging for table scraps, which were abundant around the kid. But for that last walk, we didn't make it to the park. The dog stopped walking and fell on her side outside the black gate of our development near the Mexican sage plants. Take him home, please, I told my sister, not wanting my son to see the dog die. She rushed my kid back through the gate. He was confused at the sudden change in direction. What's wrong with Cassidy? He asked as they ran home. Nobody answered him. My mom lifted the dog in her arms, her back arched out to handle the weight. The dog breathed heavily and whimpered, but didn't struggle. I took the dog from my mom halfway back to my house, her hot canine breath on my arm. The dog was 16 years old, part of the family longer than my son, longer than my husband. My parents took the dog to the vet, but she turned perky and wagged her tail, perhaps a ploy to get back home and die in peace. She did, later that evening after all the local vets closed for the day, in the living room of my parents' house. I received a tearful call as my parents loaded Cassidy into the car for one final trip to an emergency vet 45 miles north, her body no longer breathing. My son deep asleep in his bed, I cried quietly while his lullabies played over the baby monitor. My husband turned off the TV and moved from the couch to sit next to me on the love seat. He didn't say anything, but put his heavy arm around my shoulders. He knows how I grieve. He's comforted me through the suicide of an ex, the miscarriages of our siblings, my own despair when I returned from a doctor's appointment and told him that the doctor said my chances of conceiving again were slim. He didn't hand me a tissue or offer words of comfort. He let me cry deep sobs that caught in my chest, my face ugly and red, until I got out the primordial howl. Then, congested and tired, I recounted the memories in the shape of what I lost. I waited 3 days to talk to my son about the dog. Cassidy died, so when we go to Grandma and Grandpa's now, you won't see her anymore, I told him as he held on to a stuffed cat. She won't come to our house anymore. Where did she go? My son asked. She's gone, I said. Her body stopped working and she died. He walked away from me and went back to playing. When we visited my parents next, he didn't ask about the dog. Maybe he's just too young to get it. Guess I worried about talking to him for nothing. Then death started creeping into his play. Pete the cat's mama and daddy died, so I have to take care of him now, he told me one morning as we cuddled in bed and he clutched a ragged blue stuffed cat. And another day he said, I found some baby dinosaurs at the park, but their mommy and daddy died, so I tried to bring them home. That was nice of you, I told him and kissed his soft brown hair. Then one morning as we cuddled in bed, it came out. I don't want you to die, Mama. There it was, his fear of mortality ignited. I hope I'll be around with you for a long time, I told him and squeezed him a little bit closer. For the next week, I snuck back into his room hours after he was asleep to kiss his warm cheeks and whisper, I love you, baby. The death talk had subsided when, lo and behold, a trail of blood brought it back to our front door. What died outside, Mama? He asked me at bedtime. Was it a lizard? I don't know. Let's just sing a song. It's time for bed. But he's my son, and his mind is hard to shut off when it's filled with worry or anticipation. I sang one of his favorite songs, Oh, My Darling, Clementine. Glad for a moment. He doesn't know. It's about someone drowning. I hope Pete the cat never gets dead, he said as I tucked him under his dinosaur sheets and duvet. You will keep him safe, sweetheart. After I turned on his nightlight and lullaby CD, I went back downstairs. Should we look around before it gets too dark? I asked my husband. I'd hate for the baby to find something when we go out for a walk tomorrow. My husband searched around under the bushes with a pair of bright yellow gardening gloves. I stood at the curb, not close enough to see if he found anything. It's part of our division of labor. I talk about dead things with our son, and he cleans them up. Do you think it could have been something bigger, maybe a cat or a dog? If I hit a dog, I would have known, he said. Well, maybe it was someone trying to move the planter to see if there was a key. It was a fear I'd been holding in all day. The person could have smashed their hand on the heavy pot and started bleeding. You think someone would try to break in the middle of the day with our cars in the driveway? I'm sure it was a squirrel. I still thought it looked like a lot of blood, but I have no idea the volume of blood that might be in a squirrel. Maybe it was one of those guys who keeps trying to sell us a security system, I said. It's a scare tactic to drip blood across someone's porch a few days after a cold call. Our neighbors had cameras pointed around their houses for a 360-degree view, but we relied on a chain lock and a wooden dowel lodged in the sliding glass door. "You and your conspiracies," my husband said, and shook his head at me. Then I noticed a drop of blood on the light pavement of the curb. "The trail starts up here," I pointed down toward the brown drop of blood. The drips led across the street to the black fence that divides our development from the park, meant to keep humans out, but permeable to small creatures. "I guess the body isn't our problem then," my husband said, as he straightened up and pulled the garden gloves off. The next morning when I went out for a run, the drips of blood picked up again in the cul-de-sac near the temporary fire station before they disappeared into the grass. As my husband predicted, turkey vultures circled overhead. People walked by with their dogs and children in strollers, oblivious to the hurt on the horizon.